There are 3 mental habits that are crucial for our success, but which almost nobody talks about. And in this video, I'm going to draw upon my 11 years as both an internationally published author in the behavioral sciences, as well as a successful entrepreneur, to reveal these habits and show why ignoring them could be your biggest mistake. And the first of these habits is what I call non-exceptionalism. So let's start out with an important question. What makes you want to be more successful than 99% of people in the first place? Is that success even measurable? And is your measure of success any better than anyone else's measure of success? Where exactly does this desire to be special, unique, or exceptional come from? Well, back when I was in my undergrad, I discovered a book called On What Matters by the thinker Derek Parfit, and it radically changed my perspective on these questions. It wasn't until at least 8 years into running my first business, however, that I really started to realize how Parfit's ideas applied to my life. But once I did, my path to obtaining success became a lot clearer. And these ideas can make your path to success a lot clearer too. So fast forward a few years and I found myself running a test prep agency in New York City. And I was making the most money I had ever made running this business. But because I was previously coming from a place of barely being able to eat or afford my rent, this sudden influx of money was like a shock to my system. I went from trying to figure out how to make $21 stretch for a week's worth of groceries to walking into a restaurant and ordering whatever I wanted without looking at the price. I bought nice things, upgraded my apartment situation, was able to go on vacations I had never dreamed of, but over time, the joy of these things faded. They no longer made me happy, but instead I suddenly found myself more depressed than ever before. Psychologists call this phenomenon the hedonic treadmill, a state of being in which we always find ourselves needing more and more material things to fulfill our desire for happiness. Have you ever experienced this? Well, eventually I realized the core reason behind why I kept placing such high value on all these material things yet still wasn't happy. And it was all because, without realizing it, I was trying to build up my ego, gain status, and feel like I was in some way better than others. In short, I was placing my self-worth in the money and objects I was acquiring, and that's where the power of non-exceptionalism helps us break this spell. You see, eventually I reflected back upon Parfit's books I had read years ago, and I finally realized how relevant his ideas were to where I was in my life. You see, Parfit presents us with some eye-opening thought experiments to challenge how we understand our own identity, and his thought experiments reveal the most important mindset we need to become not only financially successful, but truly fulfilled as well. So Parfit asks us to consider the following scenario. There's some new technology that allows you to be transported to Mars instantly. And the way it's done is that you step into a transport machine, you become vaporized into your constituent molecules, and then those molecules are copied to a similar machine on Mars and then reconstituted back into you. Now, here's the thing. Is that really you over on Mars, or is it just a copy of you? Does the fact that you were vaporized here on Earth mean that the real you died? To make this example even clearer, let's just pretend you don't even need to be vaporized. Instead, when you step into the machine on Earth, the machine simply scans you, copies you exactly, and then reconstitutes you on Mars. So now there are literally 2 of you. But which one is the real you? What is Parfit getting at here, and what does it have to do with the mental habit of non-exceptionalism that I've claimed is so crucial for success? Well, whatever your answer is to this thought experiment, whether you think the Mars copy of you can be considered the real you or not, Parfit forces us to ask a very crucial question here. If there isn't any clear way to distinguish between the original person on Earth and the copy of the person on Mars, then how do we distinguish between me and you more broadly? What's this amazing, exceptional feature that makes any one of us any more worthy of happiness than the other? Well, whether you accept this deeply metaphysical thinking or not, the point here is this: we are not exceptional. In other words, in the grand scheme of both the expanse of the universe and of the history of humanity, none of us is so unique and special that the rest of the world needs to show us some special recognition. In fact, it's safe to say that we're all more similar and connected to each other than we are different and disconnected. And so this concept of non-exceptionalism forces us to think of achievement in an entirely new way. If we make money, that's a good thing. But why is it good? It's not good because it gives us status. It's good because it frees up our mind from having to worry about our material conditions so we can do greater good in the world and do bigger things for ourselves and for those around us. If we have a certain talent in a certain area and pursue high achievement. It's a good thing. But why is it good? Again, it's not good because it gives us status or makes us feel valuable. If we place our value in these things, we'll become a slave to them. Instead, talent and achievement are good things because we can use them to do greater good for ourselves and for those around us. So then, where do we place our self-worth if not in these things? It's a tough question, but after having tried so many careers and side hustles in my life, I've come to my own conclusion about this. Namely, that we have to place our self-worth in the degree to which we are in alignment with our core values, that we have clear, well thought out principles, and we honor those principles in every action we take. We have to replace that need for instant gratification, pleasure, and dopamine hits with the feeling of contentment that comes from living with integrity. We have to make sure that even as we're at our worst point on our path to success with nothing but hunger in our stomach, we can feel pride in ourselves rather than shame. But don't get me wrong here. Non-exceptionalism doesn't at all mean you should take the position that you don't matter or are insignificant. In fact, that brings us to our next mental habit required for success. And that habit is ego drive. Now, we just got done discussing how placing our sense of self-worth in outwardly material things won't lead to the kind of success we think we want, right? Well, yeah, so then why am I now saying we need to focus on having more ego drive? Well, let me explain. The philosopher Nietzsche was a bit of a rebel during his time. He essentially sought to demolish all ideas of morality, truth, and rationality. And before you start hating on me in the comments for appreciating his work, hear me out. I don't agree with Nietzsche on many of his views. I would say probably on most of his views. But after years of having had the opportunity to reflect on his work, I realized he did a great service to not only philosophy, but also to the actual real world out there. You see, as I went along on my entrepreneurial journey, I experienced a ton of rejection. I attended an Ivy League school, I had just published my first book on value theory, and I had even been lecturing at a couple of universities about my work. And so when I started to share with people around me that I was now running a business, I didn't exactly get a lot of support. People around me would tell me I should continue pursuing the academic path, or they would even tell me, you're really introverted and nerdy, you're not really cut out for business. And even when I started my second business, the test prep agency I shared about before, I got pressure from other people in my circle telling me this wouldn't be the right fit for me or that it wouldn't be, too risky. And so what does Nietzsche and the concept of ego drive have to do with all of this? Well, you see, just as Nietzsche was challenging the assumptions of his time that philosophers around him simply believed to be true without deep examination, so too did I feel as though people around me were so stuck in the traditional way of doing things, the traditional way of making money, the traditional idea of status and hierarchy, the traditional ways of spending 8 to 12 hours a day following someone's orders and a 30-minute lunch break. And so, although as we discussed about the habit of non-exceptionalism and the importance of not placing our sense of self-worth in external things and validation, it's equally as important to develop a healthy ego. In other words, a sense of mental independence and even mental rebellion. You see, this mental habit is different from simply bulldozing people, bullying them, and stabbing people in the back to get to the top. Instead, what the habit I'm referring to here is the habit of always questioning what we're told is true and asking for the deeper logic, evidence, and justification for it. And why is this so important for success? Well, because conformity is a strong social urge, programmed into our brain from millennia of evolution, and it takes a lot of determination and courage to overcome it. But just because conformity has helped us survive doesn't mean conformity helps us thrive. Just because it helps us maintain stability doesn't mean it helps us reach our full potential. Like Nietzsche, we have to have just enough ego to say, no, I do not consent. I have a different idea and I'm not afraid to test it. And it's that willingness to put yourself out there when everyone else is simply conforming, to test your ideas, even if they end up being wrong. It's that willingness that changes the world. And if we want to be successful, and yes, that includes having enough money to the point that we don't worry about money anymore, it's a crucial mental habit to develop. But there's something even more crucial than ego drive that we need to develop, without which we'll run the risk of making any success we do achieve feel hollow and unsustainable. And that next habit is what I call additive authenticity. Now, if you've read tons of self-help books and watched lots of videos about personal development, you've probably already heard a lot about the concept of authenticity, to the point that the idea of authenticity has now become essentially a cliche. But there are aspects of authenticity that I've discovered along my path that don't really get discussed a lot, but which are hugely important for success. And we'll see in a bit why I'm calling this additive authenticity. During the Hellenistic period of ancient Greece, there was an influential philosopher named Diogenes of Sinope, the father of what would come to be known as Cynicism. And so yeah, the philosophy of cynicism was a lot different from the concept of cynicism we think of today. Back then, this philosophy taught that in order to live a virtuous life, we need to be skeptical of social conventions. In fact, Diogenes taught we should be outspoken and even shameless. But it's also important to acknowledge that Diogenes lived in a tub on the street. He willingly gave up everything. In other words, his vision of success was about subtraction, not addition. And we'll see in a bit why this is such a crucial distinction. You see, I already shared how I was criticized by many around me when I transitioned from the academic world to the world of entrepreneurship. But what I didn't share with you was my own self-criticism. When I started out in business, I quickly discovered that pretty much everything I needed to do to become successful was the exact opposite of how I did things in the academic world. For example, as I found myself in face-to-face sales situations on a daily basis, I realized explaining statistics, facts, and features wasn't nearly as helpful for closing sales as was sharing stories, testimonials, and building rapport with the prospect. As I gave sales presentations and eventually conducted sales trainings, I realized I needed to replace vocabulary and terminology I used on a daily basis in academia with plainer, simpler language. And for the first time ever, I needed to focus on what actions on my part would produce the most profit versus what was the best theoretical idea. In short, I was feeling very inauthentic, and at many points during my journey, several of my team members even directly told me I needed to reinvent and change my identity. Okay, so here's what you might be asking yourself. Isn't it a good thing that I needed to change my identity in this way? Isn't it a helpful and necessary skill to be able to communicate with all types of people and not simply academics? Isn't it important to learn how to influence people beyond the use of facts and figures? And my answer is yes. These are all essential skills, and I'm truly grateful I learned these. So then it's obvious we always do need to keep growing and changing our identity. For sure, we need to keep stretching ourselves so far beyond our comfort zone that 10 years from now, we are unrecognizable from who we are today. But here's the mistake I made along the way. The same mistake I believe Diogenes made. I didn't just change my identity by adding on new habits and skills. I actively sought to erase my academic identity to the point that I stopped staying up to date with new research, stopped studying value theory, stopped discussing philosophy and science. I stopped it all. And simply because I had it in my mind that all aspects of my old nerdy self were holding me back. The lesson here? When learning, growing, and shifting our identity, add. Don't always subtract. Yes, we need to subtract bad habits, harmful mindsets, and the like, but all too often we automatically think we need to suppress everything about ourselves in order to be the best version of ourselves moving forward. For example, I used to go out every day in a full suit, and when someone would ask me how my day was going, I would always say, I'm doing amazing, because I simply had to project success. That's what you do in sales. But now I dress however I want. And if I'm not having a great day, I'll let you know. But importantly, I'll also talk about how I can make my day better. I won't focus on how bad something is and keep living in that. But how do we determine what to subtract and what to keep? The answer to that is admittedly unsatisfying, but true. And do you want me to just tell you something nice sounding to satisfy you, or do you want the truth? Well, the truth is, it takes experiences like those I've shared in this video to figure that out for yourself. Over time, simply stay hyper-focused on what your purpose is in life and keep asking yourself questions along your path to clarify it. Actually write down your purpose, as vague as it might be for now, and keep reading it every single morning. Eventually, you'll edit what you've written, and that's a good thing. You'll keep clarifying it through your experience, and once you've clarified it enough, it will become super clear which parts of yourself to keep and which to subtract. If you want to keep leveling up your critical thinking to make a massive impact, not only on your own life, but also on the lives of countless others, then be sure to watch this next video.